The producers of The View had a plan. Their ratings were dropping, and with the election year heating up, they wanted something controversial to stir things up. So when someone suggested inviting Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the bold young leader of Burkina Faso, Whoopi Goldberg just smirked and said, "Sure, let's educate him." They didn't really think he'd accept. After all, why would a military leader from West Africa walk into the lion's den of American daytime TV? Why take the risk of being mocked by celebrities known more for their performance activism than real debate? But Traoré didn't hesitate. He got on a plane wearing his military uniform, no PR team, no script, no cue cards. When he landed in New York, he told his small security team, "Don't worry about the cameras. I'm here to speak, not to pose." By the next morning, the studio was full. Reporters, influencers, diplomats, everyone came expecting a viral disaster. They thought Traoré would collapse under pressure from America's polished media pros. Whoopi opened with a fake smile and sharp tone. "Captain Traoré," she began, her voice full of sarcasm, "you've been called many things: revolutionary, dictator, hero to some, danger to others. But the word we hear most from human rights groups is oppressor." Traoré didn't blink. She leaned in. "You lead a system that holds women back, silences voices, and hides behind sovereignty. Doesn't the world deserve better?" The crowd went silent. This was supposed to be her big moment, her viral takedown. But Traoré leaned forward, calm and confident. "You call me oppressive," he said firmly, "but you sit on a stage paid for by companies that exploit women in factories around the world. You don't represent justice. You represent ignorance, not because you don't know better, but because you choose not to." A heavy silence filled the studio, sharp and awkward. Even the producers hadn't expected Traoré to be this calm, or this prepared. Whoopi blinked, clearly rattled, and just like that, the war of words had started. The silence in the room hit harder than any rehearsed line. Whoopi tightened her jaw, straightened her note cards like they could somehow protect her from what had just happened. For the first time in a long time, she had lost control of the room, but she wasn't about to give up. "Well, I think what you fail to understand," she said, her voice now sharper, "is that real progress means standing up for the voiceless, especially women. Especially in countries where power comes from guns, not votes." A few audience members nodded. Traoré gave a small smile, not smug, just clear. "You speak of ballots as if they've never been bought," he replied, "as if they're not printed with foreign ink. You talk about giving voice to women, but I ask who silences them more? A culture that honors motherhood, or a system that turns women into marketing tools and data points?" Whoopi leaned back, arms crossed, trying to hide the tension in her face. "Women in your country have fewer rights, fewer choices, less freedom," she pushed. "That's not protection, that's control." But Traoré didn't flinch. "And in yours, they're free to be turned into products, free to be over-sexualized at 12 and invisible at 50. You call that empowerment, I call it abandonment." Covered in glitter, the audience gasped. Now he turned fully to Whoopi. "You sit on a throne of illusions," he said. "You think your system is the only path to justice, that your values must be ours. But look closer. Ask the women in my villages who raise children, build homes, and grow food if they feel oppressed. Or ask the women here, scrolling endlessly on social media for validation, if they feel free." It wasn't the dramatic moment the producers had planned. No fireworks, no meltdown. What they got was worse, pure conviction wrapped in intelligence. Whoopi forced a smile and asked, "So what are you saying, we're the bad guys now?" Traoré paused, his eyes steady. "I'm saying that an empire that forgets to look at itself shouldn't judge the dust on someone else's mirror." The audience didn't clap, at least not yet. They were still taking it all in. And Whoopi, after all her years in front of a camera, realized this guest wasn't here to play along, he was here to challenge everything. During the commercial break, the control room was in chaos. Producers whispered into headsets. One asked if they should cut the segment short. Another said, "No, this is gold." But to Whoopi, it didn't feel like gold. She had faced presidents and powerful CEOs, but this calm, young African captain speaking with no notes was shaking her more than any of them ever had. When the cameras came back, Joy Behar tried to ease the tension. Okay, let's pivot a bit. Captain Traoré, what do you say to those who claim your government limits free speech? Traoré turned to her, acknowledging the change in tone. I say we must not confuse noise with truth, he answered. In my country, you are free to speak. What you're not free to do is sell the soul of the nation for retweets. Whoopi jumped in, sharper now. But you jail journalists. You shut down protests. That's not strength, that's fear. Traoré looked at her, then at the audience. Fear, he said, is when a society calls it hate speech to question its own contradictions. Fear is when you allow dissent only if it fits the approved narrative. In my land, protests aren't funded by sponsors. Our journalists don't sit in air-conditioned studios sipping lattes, they stand in the fields. Among the people, the audience murmured, some doubtful, some impressed. Whoopi shook her head. You make it sound noble, but you're just defending repression. You're dressing up control as honor. No, Traoré replied firmly. I'm defending responsibility. Your system sold the world the illusion that freedom has no limits, that anyone can say anything, do anything, be anything without any duty to family, to history, or to truth. We believe real freedom comes with responsibility. Without it, freedom doesn't build nations, it destroys them. The silence in the room wasn't awkward anymore, it was electric. Whoopi tried again. So you're saying your model is better, that your system of hierarchy and tradition is the future? Traoré leaned in, his voice calm but powerful. Our future isn't yours to approve, and your past isn't as spotless as your scripts make it seem. That line hit hard. A few people in the audience clapped, unsure. Others just sat in shock. For the first time, Whoopi realized this wasn't just a debate about politics or gender, it was about who gets to define truth without needing permission. And Traoré had just claimed that right without hesitation. Whoopi had built a career on powerful comebacks. She was famous for turning tense moments into applause, for using humor to break through conflict. But this time, she felt stuck. Traoré wasn't playing by the usual rules. He wasn't loud, he didn't stumble, and he wasn't looking for approval. So she went personal. You know what I see when I look at you, she said, her voice tight. A man raised in patriarchy, shaped by military power, using tradition as a way to stay in control. You're exactly what women have been trying to get away from. The room went quiet again. Traoré didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not angry, just calm. The kind of calm that comes from purpose, not pride. I was raised by a woman, he said softly. My father died when I was a boy. My mother raised 5 children, no running water, no safety, no applause. She taught me that strength isn't loud. Strength is carrying weight without complaining. You call that oppression. I call that sacred. Whoopi blinked. Traoré continued. My grandmother dug through dry earth with her bare hands, so her village could eat. She never gave TED Talks, but she gave life and gave it with dignity. He turned back to the audience. You want to free women? Then start by respecting the ones who don't speak your language, who don't tweet, who don't argue on daytime TV, the ones who live their freedom instead of selling it. Whoopi leaned forward, trying to push back. But do they even have choices? Do they get to say no? Can they leave, lead, or live without permission? Whoopi asked. Traoré nodded slowly. And in your world? He replied. Do they truly choose, or are they just picking between cages with prettier walls? Now the audience was fully focused. You want to define my people with your standards, he said, his voice stronger now. But you don't get to do that, not with headlines, not with hashtags, and not with shame disguised as progress. This time, the applause came louder. Whoopi looked shaken. She had aimed to challenge him, but Traoré had taken her question, broken it down in real time, and handed it back as a quiet lesson. The claps continued, different from the usual polite or scripted kind. This time, they felt real. Something in his words had touched a nerve, not just on TV, but in the room itself. Sunny Hostin stepped in, trying to steer the conversation. Okay, she said, but Captain, isn't there a danger in holding on to tradition too tightly? Human rights have to evolve. Traoré gave a slight smile. Of course. But who decides what counts as evolution? The ones who already benefit from how things are. He turned to Sunny. In your world, tradition means backward. In mine, it means memory. In yours, progress means escaping the past. In ours, it means holding on to what made us survive. Whoopi cut in again, sharper than before. So what you think our freedoms are fake? No, Traoré said calmly. I think your freedoms are selective and built on pain you've never truly admitted. The audience stirred. One woman in the back nodded, clearly moved. Traoré continued, you talk about feminism, and rightly so. But where was feminism when African women were sterilized without consent by foreign NGOs? Where was feminism when Western companies used our daughters in sweatshops to promote empowerment campaigns? Where was your outrage then? Whoopi jumped in, voice rising. You're deflecting, that's all this is. No, Traoré said quietly. I'm remembering what you chose to forget. The silence that followed was heavy. He leaned back, not smug, just composed. I didn't come here to win a debate. I came to remind you, the world is not your classroom. We are not here to be corrected. We are here to be heard. The moderator tried to steer things back, but it was too late. The moment had shifted. Viewers felt it. This wasn't just a guest on a talk show. This was a man defending something deeper than politics or identity. For the first time in years, the View had stopped performing and started listening to the truth. As uncomfortable as it was, the tension was real and rising. In the control room, the producers were sweating. One whispered, cut his mic. Another shot back, you cut him. And Twitter will explode. No one knew what to do. What was meant to be a carefully managed segment had turned into a raw, unfiltered global reckoning live on air. On stage, Whoopi's voice had lost its usual confidence. This wasn't her show anymore. You talk like we've done nothing good, she said quietly, still defensive. Like we haven't fought for justice, for women, for the marginalized. Traoré tilted his head. You've fought, he said, but too often. You chose battles that made you feel heroic, not the ones that made you uncomfortable. That hit hard. She glanced at her cue cards, then let them fall to the table. Let me ask you something, Captain, she said, using his title now with a colder tone. If we're so flawed, why are you even here? Why sit on this stage? He smiled. Finally, he said, because you built this stage to talk about people like me. I came to talk to you. You called it conversation. I came to make it confrontation. He didn't say it with ego, but with weight. You built the stage, but now we're speaking. For a moment, even Whoopi was silent. Her famous comebacks crafted over decades had nothing to match the truth in front of her. And Traoré wasn't done. I don't want your pity, he said. I don't need your charity. What I want, what millions of us want, is for you to stop pretending your version of justice is universal. It's not. It never was. He turned slightly toward the audience, who now hung on every word. You created systems where voices, like mine, were either exotic or erased. You put us in documentaries, not in real dialogue. And when we spoke up, you labeled us angry, uncivilized, dangerous. Applause started again, soft at first, then spreading across the room. Traoré turned back to Whoopi. Maybe the real fear isn't us. Maybe the real fear is that we're not afraid of you anymore. For the first time since the show began, Whoopi leaned back, not with power, but with reflection. Because deep down, even she knew this wasn't just another guest sharing an opinion. This was the moment her platform had been claimed by someone who didn't ask for permission. He just took it. And now, the studio no longer felt like a TV set. It felt like a courtroom. This wasn't a courtroom of law, it was a courtroom of legacy. The kind where the audience wasn't just watching, they were judging. Every word, every pause, every look felt like evidence. And Whoopi Goldberg, once the confident voice of authority on that stage, now found herself on the defensive. Her words, once sharp and respected, now felt rehearsed and hollow. Sunny Hostin, still trying to find common ground, jumped in. Captain Traoré, isn't there room for both sides? Can't we agree that both the West and the global South have space to improve? Traoré nodded respectfully. Yes, but the West never treats Africa as an equal, only as a patient or a problem. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. You think we're the problem? You asked me here, he said, looking directly at her. And from the moment I arrived, I was treated like something to fix, not someone to hear. That's the problem. Whoopi crossed her arms, visibly irritated. You're twisting this. I'm not the villain here. No, Traoré replied, calm and steady. You're not. But you are a mirror of a mindset. And sometimes the mirror has to shatter before the truth can be rebuilt. The room went still. Do you know how many African leaders come to the West and are greeted with lectures on democracy, gender, and freedom by people who've never even stepped foot in a village or listened without judgment? His voice never rose. It didn't have to. You didn't bring me here to listen, you brought me here to surrender. And when I didn't, it made you uncomfortable. Whoopi was silent. She had expected disagreement, but not this kind. Of calm, pointed truth. Not a man who refused to be the villain or the victim. Then came the moment no one saw coming. A soft-spoken woman in the audience, maybe in her 60s, stood up. He's right, she said. The entire studio turned toward her. We always talk to them, she continued, but rarely with them. Maybe it's time we listen. A few people clapped, then more, then nearly the whole room. Whoopi stayed quiet. She could have apologized. She could have softened, but she didn't, because apologizing would have meant admitting she had misunderstood something deeper than politics, something personal. And Traoré, he wasn't waiting for an apology. He never came for one. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What began as a media segment had turned into something far bigger, a real, raw confrontation between two worldviews, one built on legacy, lighting, and scripted empathy, the other built on lived experience and unapologetic truth. As the camera swept across the stage, it caught Whoopi's face, still composed, but no longer in control. Her smile had completely faded. The energy she once drew from the crowd had gone cold. And Traoré, steady and unmoved, hadn't shifted an inch in his seat. Sensing the tension, Joy Behar made one last attempt to lighten the moment. Captain Traoré, don't you think storytelling has value? That platforms like this can help build bridges? Traoré nodded gently. Yes, storytelling has value, he said, then paused. But only when both sides are allowed to speak without being edited into a stereotype. He glanced across the panel. You see this as a show, he said. But to me, this isn't performance. This is our reality. Then he turned to the audience. In your headlines, I'm always the soldier, the strong man, the silence behind a gun. But before the uniform, I was a son, a brother, a child who watched his village go dark every night. While your corporations lit up the sky with stolen minerals, the room went dead silent. Whoopi finally shifted in her seat and broke the quiet. You keep blaming the West, but what about the dictators in your own continent? The violence, the corruption, do you deny that? I don't, Traoré replied. But when your governments fund those regimes, arm them, train them, and then act shocked at their brutality, you don't get to play innocent. The audience gasped. No applause, just raw reaction. Don't talk to me about corruption, he said, locking eyes with her. Talk to the banks in your cities that hide the money of thieves. Talk to the agencies that send aid with one hand and extract with the other. His words hit hard, to heavy to twist, to reel to spin. Whoopi tried to respond. We're just trying to help. But Traoré cut in without hesitation. No, you're trying to stay in control and call it help. There it was. A truth too sharp for applause. A line that didn't need clapping, it needed silence, reflection, and for the first time, the view felt like more than a show. It felt like the world had tuned in not for entertainment, but for truth. The air in the studio felt heavier than the lights above. The once reactive crowd, quick to laugh or cheer, was now still, listening. Even the cameramen were silent. No one wanted to miss a word. And that's when Whoopi, clinging to what little control remained, leaned forward. You're strong, she said. I'll give you that. But sometimes strength turns into stubbornness, and stubbornness can become violence. It wasn't just a comment, it was a warning, almost an accusation. But Traoré didn't blink. His voice was calm, deliberate. Strength without principle is violence, he said. But principle without strength, that's surrender. He turned to her, eyes steady. You don't fear our violence, you fear our independence. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. Excuse me, Traoré continued without flinching. You say you support free nations, but only if they speak your language, adopt your values, follow your markets, You don't want partners, you want projects. And when we refuse to be molded by your hands, suddenly, we're called dangerous. The words cut straight through the set. You want our silence, he said, not our strength. Even the panelists stopped looking at their notes. They were watching him now, closely, trying to find a weakness, but there wasn't. One, only unshaken resolve. I speak for a continent that has been patient, Traoré went on. We listened while you lectured. We waited while you looted. We lived through what your textbooks leave out. And now, as we begin to rise, your media sends people like me into rooms like this, not to be heard, but to be framed. Whoopi's smile had faded, not from anger, but because there was nothing left to hide behind. No one invited me to the world stage, he said. I walked onto it. Then he leaned back, message delivered, not just to Whoopi, but to everyone who ever believed dignity came with their permission. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't clap wildly. They sat quietly, taking it in, because some truths don't need to be shouted. Sometimes it just takes one man brave enough to speak them. When the segment ended, there was no dramatic send-off, no upbeat music, just a heavy silence that followed Traoré like a shadow as he rose from his chair. Whoopi adjusted her blazer, hoping for one last line, one final punch to reclaim control. But nothing came. Her charm, her confidence, her decades of experience, they all fell short. She came ready to debate a stereotype. Instead, she met a man who shattered it. As Traoré stepped off stage, a producer standing in the wings whispered, "You just changed this show forever." He didn't respond. Backstage, a young intern nervously approached him, eyes wide. "Sir, I've never heard anyone speak like that on this show." Traoré looked at her and said simply, "Maybe no one ever expected us to." Meanwhile, social media exploded. Clips of his quiet takedowns and sharp truths spread like wildfire. The hashtags weren't what ABC had planned. Hashtag not your narrative. Hashtag the view got schooled. Hashtag Traoré was right. Back on set, Whoopi remained seated, staring at the empty chair he had left behind. It wasn't shame. It was something deeper. It wasn't defeat. It was something far more, rare reflection. Whoopi finally broke the silence, turning to her co-hosts. "I thought I was going to teach him something," she admitted. No one answered because deep down, they all knew he had taught them instead. Not just about Africa. She continued quietly, not just about feminism, power, or freedom, but about listening. About what happens when the voices you've spent your life speaking over start speaking back. As Ibrahim Traoré walked out of the building, there were no bodyguards, no press team, just a man who had walked straight into the heart of Western media, not to attack it, but to hold up a mirror. He didn't wait for applause. He didn't need validation. He had said what he came to say, and for the first time in a long time, the View had been forced to look inward and ask itself the uncomfortable question, what if we've been wrong? Because sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one that refuses to play the game. In a world where the media often turns truth into performance, Ibrahim Traoré didn't come to perform. He came to disrupt. He came to challenge the illusion that only one side gets to define what justice, freedom, or truth looks like. He didn't humiliate anyone. He didn't yell. He simply spoke firmly, honestly, and held up a truth too many are afraid to see. That dignity doesn't need permission, and sovereignty doesn't need applause. Whoopi Goldberg thought she was confronting power, but what she really faced was a man who no longer feared it. This wasn't just a debate, this was the moment. The West was reminded, Africa doesn't need a voice, it already has one. And this time, it didn't whisper,